You can steal love. You can buy power. But you can't cheat time. The headlights appeared out of nowhere on County Road 47. Two beams slicing the October black like knives. Ethan Cole had maybe 3 seconds to realize this wasn't some idiot playing chicken before SUVs boxed him in and shoved his delivery van onto the gravel shoulder with military precision. "What the heck?" Ethan muttered, hands firm on the wheel even though his heart was pounding. 23 years of fixing cars had taught him to stay level when everything went wrong. When 4 men in ski masks spilled from those vehicles like they'd rehearsed it, calm stopped being an option. The passenger door of his van burst inward. Hands hauled him out and slammed him onto the cold asphalt before he could fumble for the tire iron under his seat. Ethan Cole. The voice was muffled behind black cloth, but something in it rang familiar. "Yeah, that's him." "Wait, what do you want?" "Money." "The van." Ethan's knees hit the ground with a pain that shot up his spine. "Take what you need," he started, but the first baton found his ribs. The second cracked into his shoulder blade. By the third blow he'd given up bargaining and was just trying to breathe. "This is what happens," the voice said, stepping closer, "when you don't know your place." Through a fog of agony, Ethan saw something that made him go still. On the wrist of the man towering above him flashed a vintage Rolex Submariner with a telltale scratch across its face. He'd seen that watch 1,000 times at barbecues and birthdays and holiday dinners. Rick Santoro, his wife's tennis partner, the man who always brought fancy wine and spun stories about his policing days. "Santoro sends his regards," the man said, raising the baton again. The world went black to the sound of gravel crunching under retreating footsteps and engines fading away. Ethan came to under fluorescent lights and the scent of disinfectant. Every breath felt like glass in his ribs and his left eye was swollen shut. But he was alive, which, judging by how things had started, felt like a small miracle. "Mr. Cole," said a woman's voice. Professional, patient. "I'm Agent Dana Morrell, FBI. We need to talk." Ethan turned his head slowly and took in the middle-aged woman sitting beside his hospital bed. A face that missed nothing and forgave even less. A badge clipped to a sensible black blazer. An expression that suggested she'd seen enough police brutality to recognize it on sight. "FBI," Ethan croaked. "What's the Bureau want with a busted-up mechanic?" "We've been investigating Lieutenant Rick Santoro for racketeering," she said. "Funny timing. Your attack happened about 6 hours after we started surveillance on his known associates." Agent Morrell leaned forward slightly. "You want to tell me why 4 men would want to beat you half to death on a back road?" Ethan stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the perforations in the acoustic panels. Rick Santoro. The man who'd been sleeping with his wife for God knew how long. The man who had just tried to kill him. "Don't know any Rick Santoro," he lied smoothly. "Must have been random. Wrong place, wrong time." Agent Morrell's face didn't shift, but her eyes sharpened. "Mr. Cole, random doesn't usually involve 4 men in 2 vehicles. Random doesn't usually leave you alive." "Yeah, well, maybe I got lucky," he said. She rose and left a business card on the bedside table. "When you're ready to stop lying to yourself, give me a call. These people don't usually miss twice." After she left, Ethan lay in the dark hospital room thinking about that Rolex and the man who wore it. If Rick Santoro tried to have him killed, then Rick knew about the marriage, about Marissa, and had decided Ethan was a problem worth erasing. The question was, what was Ethan going to do about it? 3 days later, Ethan stood in the doorway of Cole Automotive, looking at 23 years of his life scattered on the concrete. They'd been meticulous. Every tool, every bit of equipment, every spare part. Gone. Even the old yard sale coffee maker he'd kept was smashed against the far wall. "Jesus, boss," Javier Reyes said at his elbow, shaking his head at the wreckage. "I came by yesterday and found it like this. Called the cops. They said it looked like a burglary. Told me these things happen around here." Ethan moved through the debris, each step sending a stab through his still raw ribs. His grandfather's toolbox, the one that taught him the difference between Phillips and Flathead, lay twisted and ruined. "You see who did it?" he asked. "Nah," Javier glanced around, uneasy. "I was at Mickey's last night. Saw your wife there." Ethan stopped dead. Marissa was at Mickey's. "Yeah, in the back booth with that cop, Santoro. They were cozy, boss. Real cozy." Mickey's was 3 blocks from the shop, a dive serving cheap beer and minding its own business. It was the kind of place Marissa would never set foot in unless she was celebrating something she needed to hide. "How cozy?" Ethan asked. Kissing, touching, laughing. She had her hand on his chest like... Javier trailed off. "Like they've been doing this a while, you know?" Ethan nodded slowly as the pieces started to click. Marissa and Rick. Rick and whoever was paying him whatever it took to try to have Ethan killed. His wife and a crooked cop probably planning a future while he was supposed to be 6 feet under. "Javi, you still got that delivery van?" "Yeah, why?" "I need to check something." They went to the lot and peered under the hood of Javier's battered Ford, covered in primer and good intentions. Ethan fumbled until his fingers found what he wanted. The dash cam Javier put in after some kid threw a rock through his windshield 6 months ago. "This thing been running all week?" Ethan asked. "Yeah, automatically saves to the memory card," Javier said. "Why?" Ethan pulled the SD card out and held it up to the light. "Because I think we just found our insurance policy." Back at Javier's apartment, they hunched over an old laptop, fast-forwarding through hours of boring road footage until they froze on the night of the attack. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m. when 2 SUVs slid into frame and forced the van off the road. "There," Ethan said, pausing the video. "Freeze it right there." The image was grainy, but the last frame before the camera died showed part of a license plate on the lead SUV. The first 3 characters were visible. A P followed by numbers that marked it as a city police fleet vehicle. "Son of a bitch," Javier whispered. "They used department cars." Ethan leaned back with a cold smile. "Rick Santoro thought he had me dead. Marissa thought she had a widow." Somewhere in the city, a corrupt cop and his cronies were celebrating. Time to show them how wrong they were. Vic's nightclub squatted on the industrial edge of downtown like a neon soar. All chrome, glass and promises about what happens after midnight. Ethan had never set foot inside. It wasn't a place that welcomed the kind of mechanic who went home to his wife every night. He wasn't that man anymore. He paid the cover and worked his way through the crowd, nursing a beer and trying to look like just another middle-aged guy hoping to steal back something he'd lost. The music rattled his healing ribs, but he clenched his teeth and aimed for the VIP section. There she was, Marissa in a red dress he'd never seen, laughing at something Rick Santoro whispered. She looked radiant in a way Ethan hadn't seen in years. Rick's arm was around her, fingers in her hair as if she belonged to him. Across from them sat a man Ethan knew from newspaper photos. Vic Barron, the club owner. Rumor had it Vic's legitimate businesses were only the lip of an iceberg. Protection rackets, money laundering, whatever paid in dirty cash in the shadows. Ethan watched for 20 minutes, memorizing faces, noting the easy familiarity between Rick and Vic. This was no mere affair. This was a darker thing with tentacles that explained why 4 men had tried to kill him on a back road. When he'd seen enough, Ethan finished his beer and went to the bar. The bartender was young, bored, trying to avoid looking at the wrong people. "Another beer," Ethan said, sliding a 20 across the marble. The bartender popped a bottle and set it on a napkin. Ethan took a sip and then set the bottle back, using his finger to write in the condensation ring. 3 SUVs, 2 bats, 1 watch. "See you soon." He folded the napkin and left it on the bar. He was nearly out the door when Rick's voice cut through the music. "Hey, you, stop right there." Ethan turned, letting Rick get a full look at his face. The cop's expression flickered from anger to confusion to something that almost looked like fear in 3 seconds. "Ethan." Rick's voice barely rose above the bass. "But you're dead." Ethan shrugged. "Yeah, that was the plan, wasn't it?" Rick started to rise, but Ethan was already moving toward the exit. Behind him came raised voices, urgent whispers, the sound of a phone being dialed. "Let them panic. Let them wonder how much I know, how much I can prove, how long I've been watching. The real fun is just getting started." 2 weeks later, the first crack appeared in Vic Barron's empire, courtesy of an anonymous tip to Channel 7 News about health code violations at 3 Little Italy restaurants. The violations were minor, a few points here and there, nothing a fine couldn't fix. But the coverage was brutal. Ethan watched the noon broadcast from Javier's couch while eating a sandwich, listening to a perfectly coiffed reporter outside Gino's Pizzeria talk about a pattern of negligence in spots tied to local businessman Victor Barron. "How do you know about the health thing?" Javier asked. "Used to fix the ventilation at Goss," Ethan said. "Saw things that made me lose my appetite." Ethan took another bite. Sometimes all you need is to point people in the right direction. The next crack came 3 days later when the Detroit Free Press ran a story about property tax irregularities at 2 of Vic's nightclubs. Again, not criminal on the surface. Just enough bureaucratic snarling to cost time and money. Ethan worked methodically, like rebuilding an engine. You don't rip everything apart at once. You map the components, find how they connect, then apply pressure to the weakest points until the whole system shudders. Meanwhile, Javier handled his own assignments. The kid had a knack for being invisible, for lingering around precincts and parking garages with a camera phone and a bottomless supply of patience. Got some good stuff yesterday, Javier reported, scrolling photos. Rick met with 3 guys behind the Riverside warehouse. 2 had priors for pill trafficking. Ethan studied the shots. Rick Santoro, the supposedly clean cop, shaking hands with known criminals in places where legitimate business didn't happen. Print them out, Ethan said. All of them. High resolution. What are you going to do with them?
Insurance, Ethan told him with a grim smile.
Agent Morell said she was investigating Rick for racketeering. Time to help her. The photos went into a manila envelope with no return address and were dropped into a mailbox 6 blocks from the federal building. Ethan didn't expect immediate fireworks. The Bureau builds cases like cathedrals, 1 stone at a time. He knew patience. 2 days later he noticed an unfamiliar sedan across from the police station. 2 agents inside with coffee and telephoto lenses. Rick Santoro's corruption probe had moved from rumor to active surveillance. The next phase demanded finesse. Ethan spent a week studying the routes used by Vic's collection crews, memorizing schedules and marking weak points. These weren't amateurs. They were organized, careful. Even the careful had vulnerabilities. Ethan found his opening at Metro Towing, one of 6 businesses paying Vic for protection against vandalism and theft. The irony was obvious. A towing company paying for protection from criminals. It took 3 nights of careful sabotage. Ethan showed up after midnight in coveralls and acted like any mechanic doing late repairs. A little sugar in fuel tanks, loosened lug nuts, some creative wiring. Nothing dangerous, nothing to hurt anyone, just enough mechanical failure to cost Metro Towing repairs and business. When the insurance investigator turned up asking about possible sabotage, Ethan made sure he was in the right coffee shop at the right time. Funny thing, he told the investigator over eggs and toast. I work for a lot of these businesses that VE been having trouble. They all had one thing in common. They all pay protection money to the same guy. The investigator's pen paused. Protection money? Yeah. Guy named Victor Barron owns that club downtown. Word is if you don't pay, bad things happen to your business. And you think this sabotage is connected? Ethan shrugged. I just fix cars, man. But if I were looking for someone who benefits from all this trouble, I might start there. 3 days later, Metro Towing's insurance was canceled. Within a week, 2 other companies in Vic's protection network got similar notices. Insurers didn't want to cover businesses that attracted an unusual amount of misfortune. Suddenly, Vic's clients weren't only paying protection, they were paying for repairs, replacement vehicles, and new premiums. The profit margins that made protection lucrative began to evaporate. Ethan watched the pressure build from a distance like a mechanic listening for a knock you couldn't quite see yet. Agent Donna Morell looked tired when she slid into the booth across from Ethan at Murphy's Diner. It was 6 in the morning on a Thursday, early enough that the only other customers were truckers and morning shift workers who kept to themselves. "You've been busy," she said without preamble. "Have I?" Ethan sipped his coffee and kept his face neutral. Anonymous tips, timely photographs, insurance investigators who suddenly knew the right questions. Agent Morell leaned forward. "I've been doing this 15 years, Mr. Cole. I can tell coincidence from orchestration. Maybe you just got lucky with your investigation. My investigation's been stalled for 8 months, and then you get beaten half to death and evidence starts raining down." She opened a manila folder and spread photos on the table. Rick meeting with known criminals, exchanging envelopes, shaking hands in shadowy lots, a lot of professional-grade photos. Ethan looked without flinching. "Looks like Rick's been a busy boy," he said. "The question is, what do you want? Justice?" "No." Agent Morell shook her head. "Justice is what happens in courtrooms. What you want is revenge. And while I appreciate the intelligence you've provided, I can't have civilians running parallel operations that might compromise federal investigations." Ethan set his cup down carefully. "What if I told you I could give you something that would wrap up your whole case? Something that would put Rick Santoro and Victor Barron away for 20 years. I'd say that depends on what you're asking for in return, she said. Give me 2 more weeks to finish what I started and I'll hand you a federal case so clean your boss will probably give you a promotion, Ethan said. Agent Morell studied him a long moment. What kind of federal case? Ethan reached into his jacket and set a small black ledger on the table between them. Agent Morell opened it and her eyebrows climbed as she read. Where did you get this? She asked. Let's just say I have friends in low places, Ethan said. That's Victor Barron's personal accounting of protection payments, money laundering and interstate smuggling. Names, dates, amounts, everything your prosecutors need to turn RICO into a slam dunk. And you happen to acquire this through legal means? I happen to acquire it, Ethan said. The legal means are between me and my conscience. He leaned back. The question is, do you want to arrest middle management and hope they flip, or do you want to roll up the entire operation? From the bottom to the top? Agent Morell snapped the little ledger shut and fixed him with a look. 2 weeks, then you're off my case completely. No more anonymous tips, no more perfectly timed photos, no more insurance investigators showing up with inside scoops. Deal. And Mr. Cole, if your personal vendetta interferes with my investigation, I'll charge you as an accessory after the fact. Ethan let a smile creep across his face. Agent Morell, by the time I'm finished, you'll be drowning in evidence. My vendetta will be the least of your concerns. Marissa used to sing in the shower when she was happy, and Ethan could hear that old echo of her voice bounce off the tiles as he let himself into what was still technically his house, keys in his hand. The same keys she hadn't bothered to remove from the ring. She was singing Fly Me to the Moon, their wedding song from 12 years back. The irony might have been funny if it didn't make him want to smash something. He padded quietly toward their bedroom, her bedroom now, he supposed, and took in the small betrayals. New linens, expensive enough to notice, an extra pillow still molded by someone else's head, a bottle of cologne on the dresser that wasn't his. Rick had clearly been making himself comfortable. Ethan sat at Marissa's vanity and waited. The singing stopped, then the sound of running water and a hairdryer. When Marissa finally stepped out in a silk robe that probably cost a week's wages for many people, she froze at the sight of him. Ethan! Her hand went to her throat, the same old nervous gesture from when they were dating. What are you doing here? Visiting my wife. He kept his tone flat, like they were remarking on the weather. Nice robe, he said. Christmas present. She tightened the belt as if modesty could rewrite the moment. I thought you were dead, she said. Yeah, that's the rumor, he replied. Ethan rose slowly so she could see the healing bruises and the careful way he moved to protect his ribs. Sorry to disappoint. I don't know what you think you know, but I know Rick Santoro tried to have me killed. I know you've been sleeping with him for months, maybe longer. I know you live in a downtown condo he pays for. Ethan stepped closer. What I don't know is whether you knew he was planning to get rid of your husband. Marissa's face went through shock, flush, then hardened into something like defiance. You have no proof, she snapped. Actually, I do. Ethan reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and cued a file. Javier's pretty handy with cameras, he said as he hit play. The screen showed Marissa in this very room 3 nights earlier, talking on the phone while she dressed for a date. Can't keep doing this, Rick, she said, voice intimate and unmistakable. When are you going to leave Susan and make this official? Rick's voice answered through the tiny speaker. As soon as we take care of this Cole situation permanently. The guy's becoming a problem we can't ignore. What kind of problem? The kind that asks too many questions and knows too many people. Don't worry, baby. After tomorrow night, you won't have to worry about Ethan ever again. The clip ended and Marissa stood frozen, staring at the phone like it had bitten her. Interesting conversation, Ethan observed calmly. The jury's going to love it. You can't do that, she stammered. That's illegal recording. It won't stand up in court. Maybe not, he said, but it'll make for great TV. He slipped the phone away. Can you picture it? Local society darling on tape discussing her husband's murder. Lovely press. Marissa sank onto the bed, composure finally cracking. What do you want, Ethan? I want you to understand something, he said. The man you're sleeping with isn't just a dirty cop. He's part of something much larger, and when it collapses it will take a lot of people down with it. Ethan moved to the window where they had once pictured a future together and said, and it's going to fall apart, Marissa, very soon. I never meant for, she began. For you to get hurt. For me to find out? For me to survive?
Ethan turned back. Which part exactly did you not mean?
She offered no answer, which was reply enough. He walked to the door and paused. By the way, you might want to find a new place to live. Rick's going to be unavailable for a while. What does that mean?
She demanded. But Ethan was already gone, leaving her alone with a silk robe and the weight of what she'd done.
The last piece dropped into place on a Tuesday morning when Javier called and his voice was sharp with adrenaline. Boss, you need to get down here right now. Channel 7's setting up outside the federal courthouse. Ethan arrived to find Dana Morrell on the courthouse steps flanked by suits who looked like they could lift small cars. News crews jockeyed for position and photographers readied flashes for what was clearly a major announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, Agent Morrell began, voice carrying. This morning federal agents arrested 14 individuals in connection with a multi-year racketeering probe targeting corrupt police officers and organized crime figures in the Detroit metro area. Ethan felt a smile tug his mouth as Agent Morrell continued. Among those arrested were Lieutenant Rick Santoro of the Detroit Police Department, alleged crime boss Victor Barron, and a dozen associates tied to protection rackets, money laundering, and interstate smuggling. Reporters erupted, but Morrell raised a hand for quiet. The investigation, she said, began 8 months ago and was greatly aided by evidence from confidential informants and concerned citizens who chose to come forward rather than let corruption fester. Ethan's phone buzzed with Javier's text. Turn on Channel 7 right now.
He pulled up the live stream just as footage showed Rick Santoro being led from his house in cuffs, face buried in his jacket as the cameras clicked. Victor Barron followed looking far less macho than in his club photos, trailed by a parade of associates and enablers. The image that made Ethan's heart trip, though, was Marissa Cole in handcuffs, being helped into a federal transport van while neighbors watched. His phone rang. Agent Morrell. Thought you'd want to know, she said. We picked up your wife this morning. Conspiracy to commit an attack, money laundering, accessory to attempted homicide. The evidence you provided was very thorough.
What evidence? Ethan asked, playing innocent. The recordings, Mr. Cole. The ones that show her knowledge of the attempt on your life. There was a pause. Oddly, the audio quality is so crisp our techs think the tapes were made with professional surveillance gear, equipment most civilians don't have access to.
Huh, Ethan said dryly.
That's interesting. Mr. Cole, I want to be explicit. This investigation is closed. The people who tried to end you are going to prison for a very long time. Your wife is going to prison. Justice has been served, as you put it. Do you understand? I understand, Ethan said. Do you? Because if any of these defendants have mysterious accidents while awaiting trial, or if evidence surfaces suggesting this was anything other than a law enforcement operation, I'll make your life very complicated.
Agent Morrell's voice was a warning.
Agent Morrell, I'm just a mechanic who got beat up on a back road, he protested. I wouldn't know how to orchestrate anything more complicated than an oil change. The line went quiet. Then she said, take care of yourself, Mr. Cole, and maybe find a new hobby. 6 months later, Ethan stood in Cole Automotive doorway and took in the shop's rebirth. New equipment lined the walls, modern diagnostic computers hummed, and 3 extra bays swallowed a steady stream of cars that had appeared now that Victor Barron's protection rackets were gone. Boss, Javier called from under a BMW. Mrs. Patterson's here about her Camry, he said. Mrs. Patterson owned the flower shop 2 blocks over, one of many small businesses suddenly with extra cash now that they weren't paying tribute.
Tell her it'll be ready by 5, Ethan called back, then returned to paperwork.
The vandalism settlement had been generous, but the real bonanza came from city contracts opening after Vic's corrupt network collapsed. Funny how legitimate work shows up fast when the illegitimate competition disappears. The bell chimed and Ethan looked up to see Agent Dana Morrell herself, more relaxed than he'd ever seen her, in jeans and a casual blazer rather than a suit. Agent Morrell, it's just Dana now, she said. I'm off duty. She glanced around approvingly. Business looks good. Can't complain, Ethan said. What brings you by? Wanted to give you an update, she said. Rick Santoro pled guilty to racketeering. 25 years. No parole for 15. Victor Barron got 30 years. The smuggling charges hit him hard. Dana paused. Your wife took a plea deal. 7 years for conspiracy and money laundering. Ethan nodded, feeling a surprising hollow where anger might have been. Marissa made her choices. Now she lives with them. There's more, Dana said. Rick's been talking to reduce his sentence. He claims the whole thing was orchestrated by someone with inside knowledge of police and federal investigative methods. That's interesting, Ethan said carefully. He says someone fed him information that led to mistakes. Someone who knew how to manipulate evidence and witnesses to build a federal case. Dana met his eyes. Someone who might have had help from current or former law enforcement. Any idea who? Dana smiled. Not a clue. And frankly, I don't care. Rick Santoro is a corrupt cop who tried to kill somebody. The fact his victim was smarter than he expected doesn't change that. She paused at the door and added, by the way, there's an opening in the financial crimes unit for a detective. They want someone analytical with experience in complex investigations. Interested? Ethan laughed. I'm just a mechanic, Dana. I fix things that are broken. Yeah, she said, looking back with something like respect. After she left, Ethan went back to his reports, but his thoughts kept drifting over the last year. Rick locked up, probably wondering how a simple mechanic had outmaneuvered a slick criminal machine. Vic Barron learning that cash and connections count for nothing when the feds have recordings about interstate smuggling. Marissa discovering that betrayal cuts both ways. The bell chimed and Javier emerged with a coffee and the morning paper. Thought you'd want to see this, boss, he said, spreading the front page across the counter. Headlines about corruption trials and the takedown of organized crime networks. Ethan glanced at it and pushed the paper aside. Ancient history, Javi. We got cars to fix. Still, he allowed one small satisfaction. Rick Santoro had tried to erase him on a back road and instead had created a patient, methodical enemy who understood revenge wasn't about brute force, it was about consequences. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows and honest commerce hummed outside. The kind that thrives when corruption is gone. Inside Cole Automotive, Ethan bent over another busted engine, whistling softly as he repaired things one job at a time. 6 months after that, on a gray December morning that promised snow, Ethan was reviewing quarterly reports when Javier burst in, face bright. Boss, turn on Channel 7 right now, he urged. Ethan grabbed the remote and flicked to the local news where the same reporter stood outside the federal courthouse. In a stunning development, federal prosecutors announced that Rick Santoro's conviction had opened a wider probe into police corruption across the metro area. Investigators using evidence from the original case had now charged 6 more officers and 3 city officials with crimes ranging from bribery to racketeering. Ethan muted the TV and leaned back. The gift that kept on giving, he said. Rick's attempt to shave his sentence had triggered a domino of indictments that would clean up the department for a generation. That's beautiful, Javi said admiringly. Even from prison, that bastard's still doing your work for you. Not my work, Ethan corrected. Justice's work. He returned to his reports, murmuring that he was just a mechanic, but that afternoon he made one last stop. The city cemetery was quiet and most visitors were gone. Snow dusted the paths and the air smelled like the promise of spring even in winter's grip. He walked to his grandfather's grave, the simple stone reading Thomas Cole, and brushed snow off the marker. He fixed things, he told the headstone, smiling as he spoke aloud. Hey, Grandpa, thought you'd want to know. The shop's doing real well. Honest customers. No one trying to shake us down. The wind moved through bare branches carrying winter and the hint of spring. Turns out those lessons you taught about patience and precision work on more than engines. Ethan smiled to himself. Sometimes the best way to repair something broken is to let it fall apart and then rebuild it properly. He lingered a few minutes thinking over the last year's roads and choices. Rick Santoro would be spending at least 15 years learning that corruption has consequences. Victor Barron would find that crime doesn't pay in the long run. Marissa would have plenty of time to reflect on the choices that landed her behind bars. As for Ethan, he had his shop, his work, and the quiet satisfaction that sometimes the good guys do win. He brushed his gloves off, climbed into his truck, and drove home through the falling snow. Tomorrow there would be more cars to fix, more problems to solve, more honest work to do. But tonight, justice had been served, and that was enough.